Good morning and welcome to the meeting of the Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians. This meeting is being held on Friday, November 17th, 2017, at the Department of Consumer Affairs Hearing Room South 102 at 1625 North Market Boulevard, Sacramento, California. I'd like to call this meeting to order. I would like to thank the schools and all other members of public who have joined us today. For the sake of time, I will not be introducing those who have signed in, but we appreciate your presence. A part of calling this meeting to order today includes the Pledge of Allegiance. Could I please ask everyone to stand and join us in the pledge as led by my fellow board member and veteran, Paul Sellers.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Agenda item number 13, introduction of board members and board staff. I'm Tammy Mendoza, board president. Will the board members please introduce themselves, starting at my far left? Sorry, Alita.
Alita Carpenter, public member.
Good morning, Paul Sellers, Psychiatric Technician member.
Good morning, John Deerking, public member.
Paula Amazola de Herrera, public member.
Good morning, I'm Bernice Basti Martinez, public member and vice president of the board.
Samantha James Perez, psychiatric technician member.
Cheryl Turner, public member.
Thank you. Let the record reflect we have quorum. At this time, I would like the interim executive officer to please introduce herself and staff present.
Good morning. My name is Cheryl Anderson, and with me today are staff from the Enforcement Division, Brian Vu, the Enforcement Chief, Kelly Williams, the Complaint Manager of the Complaint Unit, Jay Prouty, Manager of the Discipline Unit, Rocio Llamas, Manager of the Probation Unit. And from the Education Division, we do have the NECs here. Margarita Valdez, and I believe they're probably sitting there in the back, Faye Silverman, Beth DeYoung. And then we have a new staff person here today, our Associate Government Program Analyst, Geraldine Maricino. Welcome to you. From the Licensing Division, Jen Johnson, Manager of the Evaluation Section, Vicki Saavedra, who is a Staff Services Analyst in the Evaluation Unit, who is doing double duty for us today. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have legal counsel present. Would counsel please introduce himself?
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Kenneth L. Swenson, Attorney 3, Senior Staff Counsel.
Thank you. The Board of Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians is required to hold public meetings and make policy decisions that protect health, safety, and welfare of California consumers. Public meeting agendas are prepared well in advance of the board meeting. Agenda requests for consideration must be clearly set forth in writing. The board requests that all items and supporting documents to be included on the agenda be received in Sacramento headquarters by the first day of the month preceding the month of the scheduled board meeting. In addition, if there are documents that you would like board members to timely review and consider relative to an agenda item, the board asks that you submit 15 copies of the document and provide the board an electronic version of the documents, preferably on compact disc. Please ensure that you redact any student names prior to copying information. During the meeting today, public comment is welcome on any agenda item when the item is taken up by the board. Under the Bagley-Keene Open Meeting Act, the board may not take action on any issues raised by public comment that are not on the agenda, other than to decide whether to schedule that issue for a future meeting. If any person wishes to address the board, please come forward to the podium when I call for public comment. It is helpful for the record if you would state your name and the name of the organization you represent. However, you may remain anonymous if you wish. Just a reminder, please conduct yourself in a professional manner while making comments. I must insist that all those who wish to comment direct their comments to board members and refrain from personal attacks. We have a very full agenda today, and in order to allow board sufficient time to conduct its scheduled business, I may limit the time given to each person who wishes to comment, generally 3 minutes. Please understand this is because I want to hear from everyone and give all those who wish to do so a chance to comment. I would rather hear from everyone for 3 minutes instead of one person for 30 minutes. If we could have you make your comments focused and relevant to the applicable agenda item and directed to the board. If you wish, it is acceptable for you to simply state that you agree with the previous speaker, or you may make an original statement. It's up to you. If I should forget to ask for public comment on an agenda item, it is not because I intend to limit comment, so please raise your hand or come to the podium and I will recognize you. The board appreciates your cooperation and assistance in meeting its legal mandate. So I have a couple of comments that I'd like to make. I want to thank all the board members for their late evening yesterday. I appreciate your dedication to the board and your service to the protection of the public. Now, about the agenda, there are formal break periods listed on the agenda. However, due to the large number of items we have today, the only formal corporate break we will be taking is lunch. Otherwise, if board members, staff, or audience members need to take a personal break, feel free to do so on your own. We will not be stopping the proceedings. I only ask that you are quiet as possible when leaving the room, as not to disrupt business being conducted by the board. So let's get started. So we're on agenda item 14, the executive committee report. So, hi Brian. So we're going to get an update on the status of the user fee audit implementation.
Thank you, Board President. Before I get into the history of the previous fee audit done for the board, I want to give an overview of the board budget structure. And to start it off high level, the board is special funded. What that means is the funding of BVNPT comes almost entirely from the fees charged to applicants and licensees. The fees charged to licensees, which represent our revenue, have not changed since July 1st, 2009, while BVNPT operating costs, or the expenditures, are continuing to increase. With the growing licensee population, as well as an increasing expenditures and an unchanged fee schedule, the DCA Budget Office foresees the board's fund conditions entering the red in fiscal year 1920. The verbiage of our current statute authority, specifically BNP Code Section 4548 for the PTs and BNP Code Section 2895 for the VNs, do not allow it for us to adjust our fees, as we are currently at the ceiling. For example, the initial licensure, as mandated by BNP Code Section 2895 a, we can charge no more than $150, which is what we currently charge VNs. As a result, legislation must be pursued to grant us statutory authority. To my left, I've brought DCA Budget's office to kind of represent and explain high level the fund condition spreadsheet that was just handed to you.
Morning, everybody. My name is Kevin Driscoll, and I'm the budget officer here. Is it working? Sorry. So I'm Kevin Driscoll, the budget officer at Department of Consumer Affairs. I'm fairly new here. Did start in May, but I've learned a lot as I've gotten my feet wet and gotten into some of the programmatic issues. I believe in front of you, you do have a document titled Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians Analysis of Fund Condition. This is a display that actually gets published into the governor's budget every year upon Jan 10, which is the galley. It's not quite to the out years that we're displaying here. The governor's budget display does show a 3-year window. It shows a prior year, a current year, and a budget year window snapshot of your actual fund condition. The one you have in front of you actually goes out to the fiscal year 2021 to show the impact of future projected expenditures and revenues and the decline of the fund balance itself. As you can see, it does start with fiscal year 16-17, which is your prior year column, and we'll move right going over into current year 17-18 or budget year 18-19 and onward. The very first section is going to be your beginning balance. This is in essence an accounting balance sheet that's going to show a beginning balance, revenues coming in, and expenditures going out. Your very first portion is your beginning balance that rolls over from year to year. The very next section is your revenues and transfers, and as you can see, it delineates between the different types of fees and licenses that you collect upon. Then it moves from down there. There is a small section for transfer of funds. Recently, there was a merger from the Psychiatric Technicians Fund pursuant to Chapter 510, Statutes of 2015, that was transferring the remaining balance of that funds into the Vocational Nursing and Psychiatric Technicians Fund. We anticipate that to happen either this fiscal year or next fiscal year. We work with Department of Finance, and they cut an executive order for SCO to transfer those funds over to this fund. Moving downward, you find the expenditures section of the fund condition, and this is where your expenditure authority is set. That is displayed every year. That's authorized by the legislature, and that's going to be your program expenditures, state operations. Below that, I've identified and lined out some of the annual increases and decreases that can occur within a fund. Each year, we do drills at the Department of Finance to capture the entire retirement contributions, employee compensation due to raises through bargaining unit agreements, and benefit adjustment rates. There's some other one-time costs that have dropped off. There was a 2-year limited funding BCP that provided for the admin and enforcement monitor that was ending in fiscal year 17-18. So you're going to see that portion drop off from your fund condition. A few other adjustments, and if you have questions on those, I can talk to those at a higher level. And below that, there's a couple other statewide assessments that do occur within every special fund due to the statewide pro rata for controllers, state treasurers, and the other controlling agencies that get assessed to all special funds. And then from there, you see your fund balance. And below that, you'll see your months in reserve, which kind of gives a good indication of how much healthy your fund is and can sustain going forward should any revenues really decline or drop off. And as we see in fiscal year 19-20 is when we start to see the real hit and decline. Although it does not show in red completely, it shows a $35,000 balance, which is a very, very small window with which to play with. So we would anticipate some kind of fee increase happening prior to that point in order to help the fund remain solvent. There's other factors that may impact the fund. As you can see, for the one-time adjustments for retirement and the employee compensation, we don't have those figures for 19-20 and 2021, but they will be impacting the fund as well. So that's something to take in mind when you're looking at this and contemplating a fee increase. With that, I'll take any kind of questions that you may have on the actual fund condition.
Yes, Cheryl Turner. Last time we had a board meeting, I asked if we could have these reports, the budget, earlier so that we can review them prior to the meeting. And again, we're receiving them minutes before, and it's a little bit difficult, not too difficult, but a little difficult to review it at the last minute. So could we please have the report before the board meeting?
Yeah, absolutely. We could share that with the executive office and the team. We could share that monthly whenever we can produce these very quickly for your review.
Okay.
They are displayed in the governor's budget app. There are changes that do occur because they're a point in time document. So oftentimes, the retirement adjustment and the employee compensation adjustment does not happen until October, November. So you may receive a fund condition for an earlier board meeting that does not contain those adjustments. But we can absolutely provide these for you at any point in time.
Okay, thank you.
Aren't any what ifs as far as what the magnitude of the fee increases would have to be in order to bring this back into line?
So I think before we get to how much the fee increase should be, we should kind of talk about the history of the previous fee audit and kind of go from there. So, the history of the fee audit into our current condition, in April 2016, the board entered into a contract with Capital Account Partners to conduct a fee audit to ensure that BVNPT is fully accounting for all its costs and recovering adequate revenue to be reimbursed for its expenses. The board made a motion to accept this fee study in October 2016 to pursue legislation to change PT and VN fees and institute institutional fees. Due to competing priorities, this project was put on hold. Upon advisement from board counsel and due to the separation of members of the board who voted upon the original motion, the recommendation was to bring it back to the board for discussion. The board met recently with the DCA Budget's Office and Office of Legislation and Regulations. Both offices agree that there is a critical need to amend the current fee schedule to avert a budget shortfall. So the recommendation from the Executive Committee is to bring this issue before the board for discussion and to provide direction for prospective staff. So we have a fee audit that was done in 2016 that was accepted. However, with the time that has elapsed, the question or the concern could be, would that study hold weight currently? And I believe that's a discussion for the board to have, or maybe pursue alternatives and provide direction to staff.
That study project out to 2020 and beyond?
Did.
Any questions?
I have just one follow-up question here. Good morning. I would direct this to DCA budget. Could you just speak about the assumptions in the expenditures category? Does that assume flat or stable line items for administration and education and other BV and PT functions over the next 3 fiscal years?
Well, yeah, the state operations line item that you see at the very top there, that's your authorized expenditure authority from the actual legislature and the governor. Those take into account, that is your full expenditure authority for your entire program that takes into all line items and accounts. We do build in a 2% growth year to year for that. The only way that number will increase upon that is through budget change proposals or additional resources that you may need to propose to the actual legislature. Those line items do capture that. Now, the other assumptions down below, those are more drills that we go through that have formulaic computations from Department of Finance to adjust for the retirements that do increase and the pension payments that increase from year to year. So we build those in for the years that we know. But the state operations line item, that is fully what we know and is your world and doesn't really change from year to year unless the 2% increase in growth or if you had a budget change proposal to increase that line item.
Okay, thank you. As regards the retirement expenditures, does that assume normal retirement, other types of attrition or separation from state service, or is that presupposing staff salary increases through COLAs?
It's more of the salary increases due to retirement through CalPERS and those sort of things. I think if you're talking more of the actual, you're getting into more line item expenditures for your actual monthly expenditure type report, where this is a more high level fund condition where we're not taking into account. I mean, we take into account that, but it doesn't go into the line items per the various bargaining unit for retirements within your actual profession.
And just one final question. Assuming that we work through the process that involves the fee audit and doing that report, there would be board ratification. Then can you walk us through the process until we get to the actual fee increase?
The process to get to the fee increase? Or?
Right, as far as implementation, because it would require statutory change, right?
Correct. Yes, so you'd have to go through that statutory process, which you'd work with our ledge and our legal people to go down that path. And us as a budget shop would work with your team to implement the various dollar thresholds that the audit or your team is identifying, and we would apply it to these scenarios to see when it's going to be solvent and what kind of impact that is, depending on the various fees that you choose to increase. Should it be your renewal fees, your delinquent fees, that sort of thing. So we will work with your team to project scenarios due to whatever determinations and decisions and options that you guys make.
Could you give us an overview briefly of the process?
That's not my expertise. Being budgets, I don't have the full statutory background to go through that process for you.
Know how long it would take?
In an ideal world, January 1st, 2019. The biggest question now is the 2016 study. accept it as is, or do we revise it in some way? Looking at the study, there were some discrepancies. For example, I think the hours for an NEC to complete initial evaluation of a new program was 20 hours. In talking with the NECs, it's almost double that, if not more. So there are, with legislation especially, and shopping for a bill author, there's a lot of questions that will be asked to justify why we want to move forward with this fee increase. With the study as is, I'm not sure if it can justify the need completely or entirely. So again, the question is put before the board as to provide direction to staff as to move forward with the current fee audit, revise it in some way, but it's up for discussion with the board.
All right, appreciate it. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Paula Mazzola, public member. Could we, I'm a new member, so can we get access to the case study to review?
Definitely.
Secondly, I really would appreciate monthly budgets. I think that's a great idea given the situation. Third, after we review, we can, one suggestion is that if the case study may not fix the budget problem that we are going to face in the few years, we can adjust a secondary fee in the upcoming years within the same procedure. So we have one fee that can be done with the case study that was done, and then say 2 or 3 years later, with additional recommendations, embed the second adjustment within the same process. That makes sense?
Oh, it does.
And we can definitely work with you on the scenarios for that within the fund conditions. If that's a route you choose, we can see what the first fee would do to the fund and show the out years for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a little bit along with the history, and thank you to the staff for preparing this and getting this information to us. We know we'll get it in a more timely manner in terms of budget for the next time. That said, the study that we're referencing is not as current as it should be. And given the process to require a fee change, which is a statute change, it might be most helpful to us in that request that we have a more current review. And the question would be, how long would that take? And if that is done, that review could be helpful in supporting the kind of fee scenario that was just suggested. We wouldn't necessarily just ask for something without some supporting evidence and information to support our request. And again, Brian, just make sure we're understanding, if we were to ask for a new study, what kind of time would that take?
In terms of timeframes, I would have to consult with procurement, with DCA, with putting out a contract, putting out to bid. If we were to elect that method, again, I can't speak to the timeframes because I don't know. I'll have to get back to you on that. But I know the study itself, I believe the previous study done in 2016, just the methodology alone was like, I believe 2 or 3 months just to assess and evaluate the board and to come up with the data. So I assume the time frame once you get a vendor would be similar in that ballpark. But in terms of procurement process, at this time I can't speak to that time frame.
And then there would be the additional time to go through the legislative regulation change process. So we might be talking at least a calendar year potentially.
Correct.
Carol?
Okay, so the last audit was performed in 2016, just last year, Mr. Vu.
Correct.
And now you're proposing a new fee audit. Could you go over some of why you feel that the audit that was performed last year is not sufficient and we need to pay for and go through the process of another audit? fee study?
Well, I feel with the 2016 fee audit, yes, it's not that old. However, the board changes from year to year. There's been periods of transition where things have changed within the board itself. But with myself and staff and studying the actual fee audit, we found some discrepancies that may not account for the board's total possible expenditures. For example, an example I just stated was for the NECs to evaluate a new program, the hours that was given to take that task was 20 hours. In talking with the NECs, it's more than almost double that, if not more. That was just one of the discrepancies that we found. So I think in the best interest of pursuing legislation, a lot of questions will be asked to justify why we were going to move forward the rate that we choose to do so. There could be some questions that the study may not be able to answer. And in that regard, the fee audit has numbers that show programmatically the board's conditions. It can be revised, but I think at this time it's wise to have a more current study to, once we have legislation where we don't stall ourselves in the future, where we can start and be proactive right now.
Heather?
I guess I'm just concerned if we go a year into another budget review and cycle to try to get a new budget. We're at year 1920, and we're not a good place to be. Not revise. I prefer that option of revising the existing. I prefer the option of revising the existing budget to reflect what errors you may have determined or underestimates you may have determined, as opposed to starting from scratch. We don't have the time to start from scratch based on these numbers.
Again, I can't speak to the procurement process because I'm not a subject matter expert in that. I know the contract did expire. It's been done. An addendum can be done, but I would have to look into that with DCA itself to find out that process. But that's surely an option, and I can explore that.
Appears to be a priority.
Correct. I think once the board gives direction to staff, this will be top priority.
So, I'm trying to understand. You're going to contact DCA to understand if the current 2016 study can be edited or revised. Did I understand that correctly?
Could I just kind of interject? We have the opportunity as board members to direct the staff to do that for us. We can ask them to please get to DCA and see if there's a possibility. Correct me if I'm wrong, but if I understand the former document that we have, it was a single contract, and that contract has been completed. It has ended.
That's correct.
And in order to ask the company or organization who performed the work, that would be a new contract or at least an amendment. Something would have to be negotiated to open it up to get them to come back, even to update something in it. So if that is true, would it be to our advantage to have a full study, or would it be to our advantage to try to contract to have an update or adjustment? And that is a question. Did I understand it correctly?
Correct.
Okay.
With DCA and state, there are contracting procedures that must be followed, and I'm not a subject matter expert in that. The contract has expired. To see if we can do an addendum or amendment to that contract, I would have to explore that because it has expired for some time, and the deliverable was given to us. So I can research that and get back to the board.
Brian, if the board chooses to do an addendum versus a full audit, timeline would still be approximately the same to get the budget, to get the procurement for the bid.
I would have to get back to the board on that because, again, there are contracting procedures with DC and state that I am not a subject matter expert in. I do wonder with the time that has elapsed if you have to put it out to bid again. I know the state has a mechanism called a non-competitive bid, where if you have a vendor who has specific programmatic knowledge, it can be geared that way. But again, I'm unsure of the contracting process as is, so I hesitate to make any promises. But I will do my due diligence to research it and get back to the board.
Yes. My understanding is that we do have, and again, I'm learning the process still. So, is there something that the study can be reviewed by in-house, like DCA, and have DCA make adjustments that are recommended by the staff, such as the doubling of the hours and such things, since the study's already done, making the adjustment to the study in-house? Is that possible?
I can explore that with our executive officer. Again, with DCA coming on board to assist with the study, yes, they can look at numbers and validate, but not having that program knowledge that an auditor goes in and does, because they have to interview staff, look at our financials. I'm not sure how efficient that may be, but I can surely look into that to see if there can be a partnership with DCA.
This data based on that audit?
No.
No.
Given that question, could you confirm those are the data we received is based on real numbers?
Correct. This is what's actually in the governor's budget. So this is not inclusive of the audit numbers. This doesn't take into account. I mean, they may have used your fund condition to derive some of their information. I'm not fully familiar with the full study. It's before my time. But no, this is purely governor's budget. This is real data numbers, not the actual audit numbers.
Okay.
Madam President?
Yes.
To assist us in moving the discussion along, I move that we direct the staff to access whatever needs to be done to give us information about a new document reflecting a study like the one of April of 2016. And to execute that as quickly as possible.
Any discussion by board members on that? Any public comment? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote on the motion. We have a motion from Bernice to direct staff to access the documents, to do anything that needs to be done to get updated document. Too fast, Bernice. I can't write that fast. To reflect the current document that we have.
I move that we do request that a new study be done. I think that simplifies it. Does my second accept that? Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second and no public comment. We'll do a roll call vote starting with Alida.
Aye.
Paul?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Paula?
So there's no other requirements on this motion, just to do a new study. That's it.
That's my understanding.
No, nay.
Bernice?
Yes.
I'm a yes. Samantha?
Yes.
And Cheryl?
Yes.
Motion carries. And thank you for that. And we're going to go to agenda item 15, the administrative committee recommendations and possible actions. And the committee is Samantha and Cheryl.
Wait until we have attention of people.
update the budget they gave us. Okay, well, pass. Can I proceed, or
Yes.
what's going on over there? Okay. So on September 29th, the administrative committee met. We do not have a written report for you. I'm going to give a verbal report. We met with staff and to follow up on our recommendations that we made at a previous board meeting. The results of our recommendations so far is that on October 27th, a counselor from Magellan Healthcare came out and met with interested staff on 1027. There was staff participation. That was one of our recommendations. Number 2, an invitation was sent to all board staff and managers in October, inviting them to attend various solid, which is part of DCA, communication workshops and trainings. An invitation was sent out for their participation in those, which was also one of our recommendations. And the recommendation that we're following up on is that we're still researching a third-party vendor to survey staff. Participation would be confidential. Responses would be presented in aggregate form with no identifiers for staff confidentiality and to get the best response. And that will be our focus for next quarter, is to continue the research and how to the logistics for getting such a survey. That's number B on our administrative committee. Section A, implementation of AB 1229. We're going to defer that to the Leg and Reg committee, who is going to be discussing AB 1229, and Adam Quinones from DC is also here, so we won't be discussing that at this time. We just wanted to give you an update on our recommendations, and we will be meeting again next quarter to continue to research the survey. If you have any questions?
Have you looked into simply using SurveyMonkey? It's used by a number of departments within the state. It's a free application. It can be designed in house and has no cost and is
the feedback we received and our the history of feedback we received was staff were worried about the confidential nature of that.
You can actually set a switch that does not allow for tracking of the workstations.
Believe me, Mr. Sellers, I understand.
Sam, we went through that too with departments.
Yeah. So we're researching all.
Turned off.
Yeah. And also, staff was concerned about objectivity and who would make the evaluation of the results of the survey, which led us to take the position that we needed an independent third party to conduct the survey. So we could do SurveyMonkey, but I just don't know who would evaluate the results from that. Maybe we could hire a third party to do that.
Perhaps a group from those being surveyed, cross section that could sit down.
Definitely, we have a lot of variables and moving parts in that, but we are actively on it. We're considering all options.
On the heels of this, I get scared about going out and hiring vendors to do things.
Yeah, and there's if you read our report from last time. There's some very specific concerns about how we go about this. We have to do it the right way. So we're researching all options, and we'll get back to you.
Just a suggestion.
Thank you.
Any other comment? And no further comment from board members?
No, thank you.
We have to move to accept the report. Not if there's no action items, right?
And okay, thank you. So now we're on agenda 16.
Okay.
Recommendations and possible actions from the Enforcement Committee.
And I would invite Brian to come up and also participate.
Thank you, Madam President. Would it be okay to present agenda item 16 as well as 23B in conjunction as they kind of bleed in together? The enforcement.
Talking to the mic.
Would it be okay to bleed the Enforcement Committee as well as 23B, the Enforcement Division's report together as they kind of intertwine?
Can we move the agenda item 16 down to okay. Okay. Does it require a vote? Okay, so per the request of our enforcement chief, we will move agenda item 16 to with agenda item 23 to return at that time.
Thank you.
Okay? So then we will go on to the evaluation committee, agenda item 17, evaluation committee report, recommendations and possible actions. Ms. Bernice?
Thank you, Madam President. I believe everyone has had a chance, hopefully, to review our report. We wanted to give you an update regarding the continuing education audit. And just as a reminder, we that we will no longer be asking for anything related to the particular audit that occurred at the end of last year. We reported to you earlier that a letter had been prepared and would be sent out. Analysis demonstrated that the cost of sending that letter, not only in postage, but in staff time, potentially could be prohibitive. So an alternative has been recommended by staff. You will find, if you go directly to the board's website, that letter is posted so that everyone who responded to the audit has information. There is also information about that on our call-in line, and all of those who answer our call-in numbers, if one goes to an operator, will get further information. So we're before you to ask if you will accept the alternative of not taking the exceptional cost of postage and staff time and rescind the option of sending out an individual letter.
Madam Vice
And I so
President.
move.
Oh, that's what I was gonna do. I second then.
There's a motion and a second. Is there any comment or discussion by board members?
Just a point of clarification. Would we be doing a sampling of the CE submissions that we've received for individual audit?
May I respond? When talking with staff, it is our understanding that information, those documents have been reviewed as a sampling, and they were found to be accurate, and where action needed to be taken, it has been taken.
Well, that's an update on the sampling that we've already done. How about the remaining submissions?
May I ask staff to assist me with that?
Yeah, we did a sampling of the CE packets that we received,
Correct.
and we took action as appropriate as to those. There were a number of submissions that we haven't been able to go over. How
Yes.
about can you tell me what the disposition is going to be of those?
Of the ones that we have not
Right.
looked at. It's my understanding that the board voted to cease the CE audit because of the high percentage of people that were in compliance, so that were sampled. So that was my understanding. So we have not, we're bringing it to the licensing and evaluation and education committee on how to move forward.
Okay, is that
So
also,
it's still in progress.
is that also the understanding of the evaluations committee?
Yes,
All right, thank you.
Any
and
other,
then that is why we feel we can make this recommendation.
any other questions by board members? Any public comment? And there is a motion and a second on the floor. And Bernice, if you would be so kind as to repeat the motion.
That the information in response to the most recent continuing education audit will not be sent by individual letter.
And I second.
Okay. And we'll take a roll call vote. Alita?
Aye.
Paul?
Yes.
John?
Yes,
Paula?
Yes.
Bernice?
Yes,
Myself say yes. Samantha?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
So the vote is unanimous. Thank you. Thank you for the report, Bernice.
I believe the staff would like to give us some additional information. Please.
Yes. So the board members present, since the last board meeting, we met twice. Bernice Bass de Martinez and Alita Carpenter were present. Staff present were myself, Evaluations Program Manager, Rochelle Johnson, Licensing Program Manager, Siki Chen, an Evaluation Analyst, and Samantha Kalma, our Budget Analyst. Items discussed were call center, staffing update, the continuing education audit letter update, updated renewal initial license fee, PC surplus donation update, processing times for evaluation and admin unit, online exam application process status, and suggestions for future agenda items. The call center update, we've heard concerns from the board members in the past, I'd say last 12 months, regarding calls that are not being answered and such. So we are meeting monthly with DCA HR to request a call center. So right now we're gathering statistical data for HR to justify the need of the call center. And it would pretty much consist of, I believe, about 6 program techs, twos, to solely work on just answering the calls. Right now, how we have it, we are short 2 receptionists, one due to a promotion, the other one due to leaving and going to another state agency. So they right now currently take all calls and they assist with the public counter. So what we would have in this reorganization with the call center would be the reception staff that we have now just work with the public counter, and then solely the 6 to 7 people with the call center. So we are working collaboratively with HR on that.
Excuse me. May we assume just because there were the changes of those 2 staffing, that in no way reflects how well staffing has been going overall at the board.
Correct.
At the board level, there's been more than a 50% increase in staffing. So if we heard you correctly, the particular area we're talking about, there's 2 vacancies, one due to someone went to another job, but another person was promoted within the board.
Yes, correct.
Thank you.
Can I just add also, from my previous time on the evaluations committee, the recommendation of a call center and how you've described it, Ms. Johnson, seems like a very good solution. And I thank you guys for your hard work in coming up with that solution. Sounds like it's just what we need.
And I would like to add, with staff and the work that they put together to justify our request for the call center, we have the buy-in from HR. They saw the bigger picture and understand now with our data, with what we have and gave to them. They are on board with it. So HR analyst that we are working with, she's actually looking at other boards that is under her that have call centers and looking at how that was proposed.
Just as a question, so the current techs that are receptionists right now, they're receptionists, right? So they work with the counter and they answer questions. Would the call center be building 6 additional
Yes.
positions
Mhm.
on top of these techs that are answering? What are the implications for the budget? Is that being considered?
Absolutely.
Okay.
So that's
and-
part of HR and DCA HR working with us. It would also be Department of Finance as well.
Okay, and given that we just suggested that we have a new updated numbers on the study of 2016, the new study, are you getting numbers from the other call centers so that the budget can be reflective of that?
We're getting all necessary and appropriate numbers. Yes.
So there will be a collaboration between
Yes.
the call center information and Brian, who just presented
Absolutely.
numbers. Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any
Ah.
other
Oh, go ahead.
any other discussion from board?
Can I make a clarification? The call center positions won't be brand new positions. They'll be reclassified positions.
Thank you.
Mhm.
So there's no,
And that's the end of the report from our committee.
thank you for that. So we're moving on to agenda item 18, licensing committee report, recommendations and possible actions. And Jennifer, thank you.
Thank you. So the licensing committee report, the board members present, the chairs are our board president, Tammy, and Paul Sellers. They were present on both committee meetings since our last board meeting. Staff present were myself, Rochelle Johnson, admin support manager, Siki Chen, our evaluations analyst, and our legal counsel, Ken Swenson. Like I said, we met twice, September 14th and October 19th. We discussed on September 14th the FAQs and answers received by board staff, and also the reviewing of licensing division performance measures and statistics, the color code matrix that I spoke on at the last board meeting. We did not have because we were gathering the data. It is attached on the 3rd page of this report in color, and this basically gives you a screenshot of the application processing times. For the type of applications for school online for the last quarter of July, August, and September, you can see the keynote, we're in the green, which means we are processing those apps between 1 and 4 weeks. Our quarterly average is actually 1.3, and at the last board meeting it was higher. Still in the green though. School in-house, same. 1.5 weeks, so we're still in the green. Then we have our equivalency applications, which you can see our quarterly average is 19 weeks, and that is in the red. That is our more complex application. And
Excuse me, do you want to take a moment and explain why that's more complicated?
so the staff have to verify work experience and education on these applications. So they are, go ahead. Oh, sorry. They are contacting, employers, verifying the hours worked and such. So at the last board meeting, I had 3 new evaluation staff that had not been trained on this application. And since the last board meeting, all of them are now processing these applications. So at the last board meeting, I reported we were at like 22 to 23 weeks, and now we're at 19. I do want to be transparent for our next quarter because I am short-staffed, a couple analysts due to promotions. We might see a spike in that, but I am hiring people for those positions. So any questions on the equivalency application? Endorsements online, we're at 1 week in the green, and endorsements in-house, 1.3.
Questions?
I just have one comment about the discontinuation of the pocket card.
Yeah, I'm getting to that.
I'll wait.
So items discussed on October 19th are the discussions of unassigned cash and dishonored check report, staffing update, and thirdly, update on pocket cards, status of notifying employers and licensees. We also discussed the call center update, and I just basically gave them a briefing on our HR meeting, and then the review of the performance measures and stats, and then the update on the equivalency time study start to finish. And I'll speak on that in a second. The discontinuation of pocket cards, continued efforts for outreach have been made. The board worked with the California Association of Psychiatric Technicians, and a flyer was made and sent out regarding the discontinuation of pocket cards, and the language was posted to their website. In addition, the board has contacted the California Correctional Healthcare Services headquarters to request that the discontinuation of pocket card language be added to their website as well. Lastly, we recorded verbiage on the board's phone tree greeting. As reported at the last board meeting, this information was posted on our website as well about the discontinuation of pocket cards. We already reviewed the licensing performance measure stats, the color code matrix, the call center we talked about, and then discussion regarding the equivalency application time study. The committee recommended board staff to create a time study on equivalency applications to identify if there are any areas of concern within the board that could be improved. Currently, the board is capturing this data. A tracking sheet was completed and appropriate staff were trained on how to proceed with the time study. To provide an accurate capture of the data, the committee will report current status at the next board meeting. And then to be accomplished is call center update, research on outstanding ARs owed to the board by dishonored checks and unassigned cash and money transfers. Any questions on that?
Oh, I do have a comment.
Okay, thank you.
We're ready.
Go ahead.
Actually, I'm trying to give you a compliment, so.
Okay.
The discontinuation of the pocket card update. I just wanted to say I appreciate the committee and the staff's work on that, and I'm really glad to see the collaboration with stakeholders and associations. I think that was really handled well. Such a significant change can almost cause a shock to the system in a way, and but we know that it better protects the consumer, and we did save money with this change. It was a good change. The way it was implemented seems to have been done in a good way, so I think this was handled well. I just wanted to say.
Thank you. Also, when I wrote the report, I did contact the California Correctional Healthcare Services to talk to them about putting it on a website and reaching out to the institutions that have LVNs and PTs. And Monday, they reached back out to me and gave me information on who to contact to make that happen. So that was not on the report, but that happened on Monday.
Paul?
Was there any update, maybe Ken, on the language, changing the language of the conditions as test number 2?
I can barely hear you,
Or two.
Paul.
Okay, under task to be accomplished, the second one was the research outstanding accounts receivable, and the board dishonored checks. We had a discussion about changing perhaps changing language in the conditions of probation. Is there any updates on that?
We're in the process of reviewing the current language and considering making recommendations for appropriate changes to the language to enhance the enforcement process. But we are not at the point where we're ready to make any recommendations at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions from board members? Seeing none. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
So that will bring us to agenda item 19, Legislation and Regulations Committee report recommendations and possible action regarding bills of interest to the board. John and Cheryl, board members.
Yes, I'll go ahead and make our report. Cheryl Turner. Yes, the Legislative Regulations Committee met Tuesday, November 7th. Board members present, Cheryl Turner and John Deerking. Staff member present, Brian Vu, Jen Johnson, Samantha Kalma. The Legislative Regulations Committee is charged with monitoring the proposed bills by the legislature and giving feedback to the board on whether we support, oppose, or our position. It's also charged with setting forth motions designed to change regulations and to seek legislation where the board needs changes to support the BVNPT. So we met, and one of our first issues was whether or not any applicants had been denied licensure based on a default in federal student loans. This was based on a bill that has been chaptered, proposed by Santiago, and that legislation stated that no applicant shall be denied the right to a license based on a default in a federal student loan. So our committee thereafter made a motion that we would direct the question and an inquiry to the licensing committee to determine whether there were any applicants that had been denied licensure based on the default in the federal student loan. And also we wanted to work to develop a policy whereby the board is aware that from this point forward, we will not deny any applicants based on default in federal student loans. Or we wait to the end.
If there are action items, it would be an appropriate time to make a motion.
Okay, so therefore, we made a motion. I'd like to make a motion that we refer this inquiry to the licensing committee to determine whether or not any applicants have been denied the right to a license based on default in federal student loan, and to develop a policy regarding that issue.
A second.
That comes over from the committee as a recommendation.
Yes,
So it doesn't need a second. It can be voted on at this point.
yes.
So,
We currently look at credit ratings and determine
Credit ratings.
that a consideration.
Well, in certain professions, we don't know whether this has been applied to the BVNPT. They are denied licenses based on defaults in federal student loans.
that reason, not because of
Not because of
related
credit.
Okay.
No, it's not a credit issue. And
Okay.
to my knowledge, no one goes into someone's credit history. I don't know if there is some sort of notice that is passed out or circulated by the federal government. I'm not quite sure how agencies such as ours are notified, but there are some professionals who are denied licenses based on default.
Any other discussion by board members? Any public comment? Seeing none. So there is a recommendation from the Reg Committee to have the licensing committee review if there were any applicants that have been denied licensure based on a default student loan and to develop a policy about this. So we will do a roll call vote starting with Alida,
Aye.
Paul,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Paula,
Yes.
Bernice,
Yes.
myself is a yes, Samantha,
Yes.
Cheryl.
Yes.
Motion carries, it was unanimous.
Now, the next issue was the hiring of a legislative regulation analyst. In the past, we've had one. Now there is a vacancy in that position. There was a discussion by that committee as to whether we should pursue hiring that individual to fulfill that position or not. There was some feedback, and maybe we have DCA here to comment, where we were told that DCA thought that we should share a legislative regulations analyst. So we would like to hear from them. And obviously that the purpose of that position is so someone can help our committee and this board monitor the upcoming proposed bills so we can be aware of them and act on them or take a position on them.
Thank you. I have DCA Ledge Affairs here just to kind of overlay the legislative process from DCA's end. Coming in brand new to DCA, bill analyses is not drafted within the board. It does not preclude us from drafting our own bill analyses, but it is handled at another level with DCA. I just wanted DCA here to kind of represent and just explain that process out.
Yeah, so good morning. I'm Adam Quinones. I'm the Deputy Director for Legislation at the Department of Consumer Affairs. Thank you all for having us here today. So I just wanted to give a brief overview, and I'll speak a little bit, Ms. Turner, to your point about hiring a ledge staff person here at the board. So the department's legislative office, really our primary mission is to provide legislative analyses to the director, agency secretary, and the governor. We look at any bill that impacts the department and any of the 39 boards or bureaus, and take do an analysis and recommend a position on that for the governor. Those are confidential. We don't share them beyond the department, agency, or governor's office. We don't disclose our position on those analyses unless they are approved by the governor, and then we will be public position. However, we try to work very closely with all the boards and bureaus to make sure that we are reflecting your concerns on legislation, any issues that you think should be addressed in a bill. We want to make sure we're reflecting those. So, while we may not share that analysis or position, we want to make sure that we are capturing the concerns of the board. Having said that, I know that a number of boards and bureaus have a dedicated legislative or regulatory staff person to do legislative tracking, appoint a contact for our office to interface with, to send constituent issues from the legislature to have discussions about particular bills. I know that there are a number that do that, and so while the board wouldn't be the one sending a recommendation and analysis forward to the governor, obviously that person would serve at the pleasure of the board, providing you with information about bills, so that you can make an informed decision, take a position, as the board desires. So that's really the service that we provide. And again, we want to make sure that we're being collaborative and reflecting your concerns and comments, but a dedicated legislative staff person at the board would really provide more of a day-to-day service to you all.
So it's your position that you agree that we should have our own analyst who can work collaboratively with the DCA? Or are you saying we should depend on the DCA?
Well, you're welcome to contact us and myself at any time. But a number of boards have dedicated legislative and regulatory positions. And so, I'm not up to speed on your budget as well as certainly the budget folks. So I think that it can be very valuable for the board to have a ledge person that is our point of contact, that's your point of contact to go over bills and
Excuse me, I have a question. In the DCA orientation that I was just in on Wednesday, apparently the lack of transparency, DCA's position has caused problems with some of the other boards, and it was mentioned that they, much to their chagrin, had taken position on legislation to find out that DCA is in direct opposition with the position that they've taken. Don't you think it would be more collaborative, to use your own terminology, for DCA to let the different boards know what your position is on legislation?
So I'm not allowed to share our position. That's really something that the governor's office decides, right? That this is a recommendation we are putting forward to the administration, to the director and agency secretary. So we don't disclose those unless we have an approved position by the governor. So in those situations, yeah, we're happy to share concerns, to testify at legislative hearings about a bill. But typically, we keep those confidential. Again, we want to make sure that we are conveying maybe some concerns that we might have, in conversations with, if there's a dedicated legislative staff person, making sure we're conveying your concerns in our analysis. I mean, 9 times out of 10, when we send an analysis forward, we are asked, what does the board think? What's the board's position? And so we want to make sure we're conveying that. But we're not able to disclose share our analysis or disclose our position unless it's been approved by the governor.
I think to piggyback off that, one of my initial concerns, as was the Ledge Reg Committee's concern, was that if information is not being shared to the board, how do we know that DCA is capturing our interest without having programmatic knowledge? But the main thing in talking to DCA Ledge is it's a partnership with that Ledge Red's position and with the DCA Ledge shop, is that there has to be an active partnership where communication free flows back and forth.
I still have questions, Ms. Carpenter? So my initial reaction to this is I have real serious concerns about us relying solely on a DCA bill analysis. We know DCA has 39 boards and bureaus. They may not know the specifics of our own board. They may not know our specific concerns or interests. And in fact, there may be times and have been times in the past when our position or interests are different than DCA's. I think it's my initial reaction is it's a dangerous to not have our own people looking at it and asserting our interests and concerns. Of course, working with DCA, but not relying on them solely, that's a big concern for me.
Right, and really as the function of the board is to be that policy setting body, right? And so different from the bureaus under the Department of Consumer Affairs who do rely on us for their ledge, function. The board, it's really the semi-autonomous nature of the board to develop that policy, to take positions on legislation. And so, most boards do not rely on the department to provide that kind of day-to-day feedback. But something that at any time, I just want to reiterate, you can reach out to my office to have a conversation about a bill, to express concerns, all of that.
Carol?
Yes. So in addition to the BVNPT and the DCA at times having an actual conflict or contradictory points of view on specific legislation, we also have to be concerned about who's going to be the individual who works within the board to move forward any changes we have or we're proposing in legislation or regulations. For instance, there are a couple of items on agenda that we would like to change, like the fee increases or like the school passage rate. There needs to be someone who's dedicated to helping us if we make a decision on those items, to walking those things through so that they move forward and can become official parts. So for that reason, I believe it's the Reg Committee's recommendation that we move forward with hiring our own independent full-time Reg analysts. We already have a budget set aside for that individual. We've had that individual in the past, but now there is a vacancy, and there certainly is no problem that I can foresee with them working collaboratively with DCA. So based on, so are there any other?
Is that a full-time position? Would that take somebody 40 hours a week to accomplish?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yes.
Oh.
Right now we have someone who's doing double duty. Miss Kalma is working part-time with her other, and she's doing a good job. But yeah, now that we're an active board and we're moving forward with.
I thought I heard it said as this conversation developed that there was some talk about sharing a legislative analyst with another board.
Well, that was the feedback. Okay, so let me back up. As the Reg Committee, we were discussing and asking what is the status of the hiring.
Okay.
We received feedback from DCA suggesting that it would be in our best interest to rely on their representative.
And I just don't want to seem like I'm overreacting, but I would like to express the seriousness of us having our own opinion and our own person working on these ledge regs. And in the past, things have maybe slipped past us, or we haven't found out about certain ledge and reg activities because we haven't had our own analyst, and it has had caused harm or potential harm to this board. And especially with the last session, we might not have been a board anymore.
I was thinking strictly from a budgetary perspective, if it was a cost saving, if we could share between another board at that position.
Okay.
That was my only. I don't doubt the need.
To be more specific, AB 1229. This board was almost sunsetted. Would have eliminated this board. And then DCA would have taken over the powers, our powers, and it would have become a bureau. So as you can see, that is a direct conflict between the two entities. So based on that as an example, it just seems to me like we cannot rely upon actually utilizing their, but we can still work collaboratively.
Just in DCA, I was suggesting another board may have some need also that we could split.
Well, if for instance,
my only question and the answer appears to be that no, we need somebody at least 40 hours a week, if not more.
Well, I don't know. We're not supposed to debate, so I appreciate your suggestion. But okay, so let's say, for example, we rely upon another board, like the RN board. Well, the RN board may want to reduce the scope of, practice. Thank you. I'm a public member. The scope of practice of our LVN and PTs, so that their scope of practice would be enlarged. So you can see there is a potential conflict right there, and we can probably go down the line.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Paula?
I had a question, and I'm still kind of wondering. You said some of the boards have legislative assistant, but some of them don't, and you collaborate with them. Can you describe the process of the boards that do not have someone?
Yeah, so everybody has a legislative point of contact. Some boards have a dedicated person where their sole function is doing legislative and regulations. Other people designate the assistant executive officer as the ledge point of contact. So it's not a dedicated legislative position. So there's kind of various ways you can do it. I think what I just want to make sure, and I'm not sure who said that DCA should perform that function for the board. That doesn't happen. So I think there's various ways you can address it, whether it's a dedicated staff person or whether it's a function that's built into somebody else's position, the assistant executive officer or whoever that person is. Some boards have enough of a legislative workload to justify a sole position focused on that.
Any further questions?
Oh, does anyone else on the board have any other questions?
Regarding our report?
No, regarding the, well, I guess I should make a motion, right? So I move that this board go forward with, as it had already planned, in hiring a full-time reg analyst.
I second.
Any questions?
Discussion?
Aye. Oh.
Any public comment? Seeing none? So we'll do a roll call vote for the motion set forth by the I thought it was me. I'm like, I didn't touch it. The recommendation set forth by the Legislative and Regulations Committee to move forward to hiring a full-time reg analyst to work collaboratively with DCA. And we'll do a roll call vote starting with Alita.
As a retired lobbyist, I think you know my position. Aye.
Paul?
Aye.
John?
Yes.
Paula?
Yes.
Bernice?
Yes.
Myself is a yes. Samantha?
Yes.
And Cheryl?
Yes.
So motion carries, it's unanimous.
All right, we had a really busy meeting, so we have a few other issues to discuss. We talked about the fee increase, and that is something that if the board were to approve that, then the Reg Committee would develop some language and pursue a motion with the board. So Mr. Vu already discussed that, and another committee already discussed that issue. And so the board, as you heard, approved the study. All right, the next issue we had is that we were wanting to receive the feedback on the Reg Committee's proposal to review regulations related to the pass rate for the schools. And last time at the last board meeting, we referred it to the Education Committee for feedback.
And that is correct, and the Education Committee will have a report.
All right. Okay, good.
We promised you by the next board meeting. And this is that meeting.
Great, thank you. Now, we also were impacted by AB 1229. And I think there's someone here who may be speaking on that. But one of the things the Reg Committee wanted to do is to remind the board that we have some obligations under that new bill. And part of those obligations are to submit written reports to the legislature due April 1st, 2018, July 1st, 2018, October 1st, 2018, January 1st, 2019, July 1st, 2019, and January 1st, 2020. And so we wanted to make sure that those dates were added to the board's agenda or calendar so we would not forget that. And there was also discussion as to which committee, if any, would be taking the lead on working on that report to the legislature. There was some discussion. I know administrative committee had started last go round, but it was John Deere King brought it to our attention that there is a strategic outreach committee. And so we just wanted to clarify which committee, whether it was that committee that would be taking the lead on gathering reports from each of the committees for preparation, or which committee would be assigned to handle that. So I don't know if you're prepared to answer that, but
No, that was my question.
Okay.
That would be at the direction of the president, our organizational structure based on our committees.
so we could refer it to the executive committee if the committee needs to give us feedback. But the first report, April 1st, will be after the next board meeting. It will be due. So I don't know if our president is prepared to respond at this time, or would like to confer or get back to us. But it's just for you to be aware of.
Yeah, I believe that it might be good for strategic outreach.
We would happily do that.
And it would be Madam President, it would be understood that staff always provides help and support.
Support for that.
But we really want to make sure there's the oversight, and by placing it in a committee, then we will be ensured deadlines are met. The responsibility is ours as board
board.
members.
All right. Okay. There was also a discussion about the proposed change in language to the Ledge Reg Committee's role. And the board approved last board meeting to allow the Ledge Reg Committee to take certain action on behalf of the board when there is a known position from the board to act on legislation. And the example again was AB 1229. Between board meetings, the committee had to take action, help to support our executive officer, our interim executive officer, and other members of the board appear before the legislature to answer questions and provide feedback in response to AB 1229. So attached as attachment B, you will find the actual written language that we've added based upon the board's approval, and now we are seeking the board's approval of the actual written language.
I move to accept the proposed language as attached.
I second it.
Any discussion by board members? Seeing none, any public comment? Huh?
Madam President, it might be helpful just to read it,
Yes,
just the
please.
change
All
piece
right.
particularly.
Do you want to?
Carol?
Okay. All right. So, in this paragraph, so I'll just refer to the line. The committee is also authorized by the board to act on legislation and regulations between scheduled board meetings on matters where a position has been previously taken by the board, period.
Paul, did you find it?
Yeah,
It's on the back of the report.
I see it. Thank you.
So any discussion? Any opinion from our legal?
It's been reviewed and there are no legal impediments.
So no public comment and no further discussion by the board. And the motion was made by Samantha to accept the recommendation from the Ledge Ridge Committee and seconded by Cheryl. So we'll do a roll call vote. Alita?
Aye.
Paul?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Paula?
Yes.
Bernice?
Yes.
Myself is a yes. Samantha?
Yes.
Cheryl?
Yes.
The motion carries. It was unanimous.
All right, thank you. And then also there are various proposed bills and actually, chapter bills where we took a position which are attached, which I won't go through. You can read them if you're interested. And so that concludes Ledge Ridge report.
And then we
Summary.
had Adam here to give us
Yes.
Yeah.
on 1229.
Happy to
Thank
give
you.
you just a little bit of background, and most of you probably know this already. But just wanted to cover a bit of Assembly Bill 1229, which was obviously the board's sunset bill. Really, the intent of the provisions that were ultimately in that bill is to really codify a more collaborative relationship between the board and the Department of Consumer Affairs. I think it's a result of the enforcement monitor, the recommendations that came out of the reports from the enforcement monitor, as well as some of the discussion that occurred at the board's sunset review hearing on March 20th. Yes. And so, one of the things that the department heard in that sunset hearing were the concerns of the legislature, but also the concerns of stakeholders and the board that the board should remain, whole, and that it shouldn't be turned into a bureau. And so I just want to make sure that we're clear that, for us, we wanted to also preserve the policy setting autonomy of the board. Creating a bureau was not something that we were seeking to do. The legislature, put forth a number of recommendations. We provided some technical assistance on those recommendations and provided some of our own. And I think what we ended up with, it's certainly a hybrid, but I think it will sort of allow the board to continue to move forward administratively while maintaining that policy setting function. So really quickly, the bill provides a 3-year sunset for the board. It changes the appointing authority of the executive officer to the governor for a limited term of 2 years, at which point that final year it would revert back to the board to appoint that executive officer. It would require the board to submit reports, as Ms. Turner stated, regarding the implementation of the enforcement monitor's recommendations. It would allow the department to conduct what we call organizational change management with the board. And really that's where we would have some of our staff from our solid unit go in, look at the board's processes, identify what's working and what is not, try to gain some efficiencies in some of the board's processes. And it's really something that we are encouraging all of our boards to do and utilize, that service from our solid unit to just try to, become more efficient, to improve processes and map, exactly what a licensing process is, what the step-by-step functions are, and how do we improve those, how do we change those. So the bill would mandate that, as well as a more collaborative, approach with our division investigation. It would require the board to meet with our division investigation, provide complaint intake data, status updates on complaints, things like that. So, for us, it's really things that, maybe didn't need to be mandated, but I think that the legislature wanted some comfort that these things would occur. And, I personally want to thank Ms. Anderson and Mr. Vu, who've been very collaborative, and information that we need, suggestions that we have been welcomed and well received. And so, again, I think that going forward, what the legislature wanted to see was more collaborative approach to addressing some of the concerns that they had with administration. To answer questions or
Carol?
Okay, so just a point of clarification on the appointing authority of the executive officer. Isn't it true that the governor will have the power to appoint beginning January 1st, 2018?
yes,
And so there's
yeah,
a window that
right.
we have as a board.
Right, and so yeah, many of the provisions in the bill don't take effect until January 1, 2018. So obviously, there's still 5-ish days.
Yes, and based on implementation, Mr. Quinones of AB 1229, it appears explicitly that the board will retain policy-making authority and delegate functions even if the EO is appointed by the governor, correct?
Right, and that's again something that we and the legislature, and I think obviously the board wanted to maintain, is that policy setting function remains with the board. I think what the legislature, the concerns we heard were on some of the more day-to-day administrative issues, enforcement issues, which again, our staff, the department team is happy to lend assistance wherever it's needed, and certainly we have enforcement expertise in the department, and so that's something that we are happy to partner on.
And the only wrinkle that I can see as far as changes in day-to-day operation is that the director now is given authority under one of the sections, point 8, I think, through the DCI. The director shall have authority to determine the need and to implement changes necessary for the appropriate administration of the board's enforcement functions.
Right, and so that was another issue I think that was brought up during the sunset process during the hearing, was that there were, and that the enforcement monitor had noted in one of his reports, was that complaints intake might not be handled the appropriate way, that that there were concerns generally in the enforcement function of the board, and so that's one where again, our division of investigation, a lot of expertise in the enforcement arena, and Chief David Chris is here today if there's any more detailed questions that I can answer. But it's really to allow the department to get in there and start helping out with cases, to start establishing clear processes, and again for a limited time here, so we can I'm fully aware that there were some vacancies in the enforcement side of the board. This would allow us, the department, to get in there and kind of stabilize and provide training and resources, and then eventually the board takes that function over again.
Thank you. And just to clarify, the statutory authority to implement changes seems to be plenary, at least with respect to the enforcement piece. Would that include, do you think, operational and budget changes?
I think that the bill, the intent was really just on the enforcement side. Obviously, the executive officer can they see fit to, budget administration, that kind of thing. But I think this particular section focuses on enforcement.
And I understand the legislative intent, but at the same time, director will have the authority to determine the need and to implement changes. So that could include staff changes as far as increased assistance for our enforcement units, right?
I think it was really envisioned to be more about process changes. I don't think it was really determined to be staffing changes. I think it was more to the functions of the board, the processes, investigation processes, that kind of thing.
Okay, so if that's correct, and I believe it is, what kind of collaboration or cooperation will we as a board have vis-a-vis staff with respect to the assistance we can expect from DCA?
Yeah, I'd probably defer to Chief Chris on sort of how that will exactly play out. But I know, currently there's Division of Investigation staff helping out in the enforcement unit of the board. And so I'll let.
And the reason I asked that, just as a bit of a background, we went through the sunset process, we had the sunset hearing, and we were told, the legislature was told, that the DCA has given a great deal of support to our board and its functions.
Yeah, I think over time, over the last several years, I think a good deal. Speak more to that, but I think a great deal has been given.
Dave?
Yes, absolutely. Great deal of time and staff.
Can you turn the mic on?
Okay, that helps. Yeah, over time, the Division of Investigation is partnered with the board to improve processes, help out in expertise, and just guiding the existing staff towards completing the processes. And I think this was, as Adam's commented, this was just the legislature's way of ensuring that moving forward, regardless of who's in charge of the board and whoever the executive officer is that we work together as a team and move the bus forward and make sure that the work gets done. And so our staff is there now, and I believe both the board staff and the division staff are doing everything that they can to make sure the processes move forward and that consumers are protected.
And the reason I ask in the first place is we have had a history here of requesting help from DCA, especially with respect to BCPs for staff.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the budget issues.
We've had HR issues where we've requested to move forward, especially with some of our senior management. And it appears to me, frankly, with all due respect, that there has been some stonewalling in the past on the part of DCA.
Yeah, regarding BCPs and budget, I'd be happy to contact our budget folks, and then they could provide more information about that.
What I want to know is, as we move forward, and clearly we have a mechanism in place, at least as far as DCA's comfort level, and then also we have the statutory changes. What kind of day-to-day cooperation can we expect from DCA with regards to some of these issues, budget and staffing, especially with HR, hiring process?
Yeah, so I'll say I'm not aware of any time when the department stonewalled or did anything like that. I mean, what this is really aimed at is mandating a collaborative approach, which I don't think has existed in the past necessarily. And I mean, I don't think we need to go through instances of where it did and didn't and why. But I think what this is all getting to is that the department does have an oversight role. The legislature would like us to exercise that oversight role more actively. Again, Ms. Anderson, Mr. Vu have been very cooperative and helpful, and we've listened to them, and they are listening to us. And so I think that it's a easy and good path forward. But the legislature obviously wanted to put these in to mandate, as Chief Chris said, whoever is in charge, these things will happen, and the basic functions of the board will continue. And so I know myself, the other deputy directors at DCA, that our new chief deputy and the director will make ourselves available when this board needs us, to be here and provide updates, to assist staff in whatever regard that is.
All right, thank you.
It is so good to hear you say that. And I have an observation. Within the last 2 or 3 months, as a board member, I have observed better collaboration. As someone who consults on collaborative partnerships and how that works, I would hope that as the result of the model that is functioning in these last several months, that that model of collaboration, it does take two sides, which means not just the board, but also DCA to come to the table, and maybe you can help your other colleagues model the way you are now working with this board, because it certainly is more functional.
Well, thank you, and you know, as Adam has stated, things are working collaboratively now. So we do have staff that's actively working with board staff, and we just want to make sure that continues moving forward.
And again, I'm saying I believe through the enforcement discussion, we have a great model of what we would hope to see exhibited and practiced with other areas. So thank you for being role models. Alita, you had a comment earlier or question?
I did. It goes back to the orientation. I'm a new board member. Back to the orientation on Wednesday. They went over the functions of the board members. And as a board, each of the boards and each of the commissions, one of their primary duties was to hire its executive officer, which after a series of interviews, we have made a choice. When January 1st rolls around, will DCA be making recommendations to the governor as to whom you would like to be working with in the future?
I'm not sure of what that process will look like. I know ultimately it's the governor's decision on who gets is appointed the executive officer. So the details I'm not aware of. I can certainly have conversations with our executive staff to see what that process might look like.
Just to repeat myself, that might be a great opportunity to demonstrate how we work collaboratively in making those recommendations. Look forward to the opportunity to do this with you.
Great. Samantha?
Thank you. So we have DOI here, we have enforcement, and we've had a long history of collaboration with DOI starting as far back as 2014 with the initial enforcement task force recommendations, which I was one half of the enforcement task force. I think that we're working well collaboratively from what I've heard with enforcement and DOI. We have a new enforcement chief, and we have Ms. Whitley, who came to see us before during some transition and is back now with her team. The last enforcement committee meeting that we held, there were representatives from DOI, from DCA exec, from our staff, board members, and the monitor. So I don't think you could get much more collaborative than that. So I think we've already made steps towards collaboration and are actively collaborating, I would say, with as far as our enforcement functions and our DOI functions. I personally, as far as collaboration, don't see that as the problem area. There are other areas in which we need to collaborate with DCA, and I would just echo my Vice President Baste Martinez remark that it goes both ways. There's been some talk over the oversight role of DCA over this board, but I think it also bears, also should be noted that, as you said before, we are semi-autonomous, and we are also a customer. And as a customer, we have standards of what we expect from the services we receive. I think that should also be kept in mind. There is a balance. There's a lot of emphasis given on DCA's oversight role, but that's not the only role that it has. We are semi-autonomous in many functions, and we do pay a lot of money for services, and we have a standard of what we expect those services to be like. So I think that should be mentioned on the record. that we also have a customer role in this. As far as organizational change management, I've heard that a couple times. Does that apply only to the enforcement division, or that applies to other divisions such as licensing, admin, exec?
Yeah, so I think the intent is for to in AB 1229 was really to give to allow the department to perform that organizational change management function, looking at licensing and enforcement, the various processes of the board, mapping out what exactly the processes are now, and then looking at potential improvements or efficiencies that could be gained.
Does our legend reg agree that it's not? Because I just read again 1229. I seem to be targeted towards enforcement to me.
That's how I interpret it.
Yeah, that it's
Enforcement
not
and
doesn't
license.
have to do with licensing and admin
Well,
and exec.
But definitely not admin and exec. It did not include that based on my understanding. Do it again.
Cheryl, that was my understanding also.
That it's strictly enforcement.
So Section 7 of the bill, which is Business and Professions Code, Section 2847.7, states the director may direct department staff, including staff of the Solid Training and Planning Office, to review and evaluate the board's licensing systems and procedures as determined appropriate by the director for the purpose of identifying deficiencies, improving quality efficiency of the board's licensing processes. So I think it was sort of a two-pronged approach, that the division investigation would really be looking at the enforcement processes. The Solid team would be looking at the other licensing processes and things like that.
And frankly, the monitor's report was top heavy on enforcement.
Where does the term organizational change management, what directly does that pertain to?
So this function here, and it's not stated in the bill, organizational change management, but that is a process that the department has been implementing with a number of other boards and bureaus, particularly those ones that are transitioning onto a new IT system. Obviously, this board is not, but it's really a system that allows an organization to identify how they do business. What are the processes that we take in licensing, enforcement, what have you, and map them. You map them out. You look at a flow chart to see, is this working? Does this make sense? Can we improve it? Are there things that are causing delays in licensing? So it's really a process that we're undertaking with a number of boards and bureaus that we think is really beneficial.
It's a review of systems,
processes.
Processes. Mr. Vu, I see you reaching.
I think the term OCM is more of a formal terminology for something that we are pretty much doing every day. I mean, every day we're reviewing our procedures to make sure they're the most efficient, most streamlined process. I think that's just formal terminology for a process that every board bureau should be doing every day. So while it's not outlined in the bill per se, and DCA's role is to make sure or maybe oversee that we are doing this function we should be doing every day, that is a process that all divisions, all units are performing on a daily basis.
And I guess what I'm trying to envision in my mind is what that looks like as a practical matter, what that would look like if I walked into the board and saw this going on. It's again, reviewing of processes, documents, and viewing of staff. What exactly does it look like?
Yeah, we actually have Damon Nelson here from the Solid unit who can speak to the exact. Brian Clifford.
Good morning, board members. So
for the public, would you introduce yourself too?
Clifford, the DCA Executive Office, and I oversee the Solid unit. The purpose of this is to help this board get its licensing unit running well. I think that was included in your letter in the first to the first monitor report, that you wanted to expand the review to licensing. So I think this is kind of speaking to that desire and that need.
Can you tell me again? What does it look like? What does it look like?
Good morning. My name is Damon Nelson. I'm the Solid Section Manager. Solid provides all kinds of services to boards and bureaus: strategic planning, training, and organizational change management. Kind of what it looks like is we have some just outstanding staff on my team that would meet with your unit that's in charge of, say, a licensing process. Bring them in, they'd ask them, okay, what's the first step? And everybody in agreement, is that the same step? A lot of the times there isn't consensus in one unit or stuff. So they'll go through the whole process, they'll gain consensus, they'll put it up in a map, which is basically just a visual depiction of what the steps are involved, who does what documents are involved in that, how long each step is supposed to take, which is a really good management tool as far as holding staff accountable for how long a process should take. So if they map a process and weeks time, that gives management a tool to hold staff accountable down in the future. Like if it's taking 2 weeks to do something, you can look into that. Is there a training that needed to be implemented? Is there a process? Where's the disconnect? It's also an opportunity to look for efficiency. We have 20 steps in this licensing process. Do we need to do all these? Is there value added for the end user? That's one of the mapping processes. The other part is at times we have met with staff, done like focus groups, job shadowing. Staff are the ones that are really the experts on how to do their job. So a lot of the times we'll meet with them and gather recommendations on what they do, as well as recommendations that my staff have, over the years of working with other boards and bureaus, see efficiencies. Either a report that goes to the executive management for your guys' review, for your board to review, implement that. And I think that was one of the keys in the legislation was if DCA does go in and spend the time doing this and comes up with recommendations that are agreed upon by the people working there, by the solid team, are they going to be actually be enforced? Questions, or does that kind of answer?
That's it for now.
All right.
Any other board members have questions? What?
Yes, so I guess, and I'm a new member and I also attended the training Wednesday, and it seemed that the process of working with DCA and the board and the different boards is fluid and flexible and different with each of them. Given 1229 AB, that provides a more structured collaboration. And is there a similar collaboration that will be as structured to with another board that you can allude to or explain that process to us?
We have worked with the Board of Registered Nursing for quite a while, and we went through both their enforcement and licensing. How we start is we do a change management training. What does change management look like? How do you implement change? Because everybody has their different timetable for accepting change and moving on. Kind of prepare them for what that process will be. Then we do an inventory with the staff and the management. What are your processes? And from there we go ahead and build the schedule out of how we're going to work on each of those processes. And in doing that, we come up with an as-is map or a documentation of what is the current state. That's very important. Getting consensus on how are we going to do the job as a unit, as a collective entity. And from there, we include the recommendations, process changes. We ask the question, are these steps legislatively or regulatory mandated? If not, do we really need to do that kind of stuff? So it goes through a review of the team that worked with my staff to put that together, a review by the management, they sign off on it. And it's also a good learning tool as far as staff turnover. It's a documentation, so when new staff come on and start working, here's some documentation how to do your job. And from there, boards and bureaus can do additional process documentation, policies, and procedure manuals. But we're very flexible in what our customers want as far as an end product. But the really key takeaway is identifying how we do our businesses, how could it be better, and making sure steps are taken to actually implement those changes going forward.
Thank you.
Any further questions from board members? Thank you. Carol, is there more in your report?
So no, we went over the action items and we passed motions on everything. So unless you want me to repeat them again, then that's concludes our report, and we'd like to have our report approved. Is that appropriate? Legal counsel, we need to.
Okay. So there's a motion, and it was a recommendation to accept their report from the Legislative and Regulations Committee. Is there any public comment on that? Seeing none. Any board discussion? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote. Starting with Alita.
Aye.
Paul.
Yes.
Don.
Yes.
Paula.
Yes.
Bernice.
Yes.
Myself is yes. Samantha.
Yes.
Carol.
Yes.
Motion is carried. It was unanimous. So we will move on to agenda item 20. Education Committee report, recommendations, and possible actions. And I'll turn it over to Bernice.
Thank you, Madam President. As a Education Committee, excuse me, we have met several times, and staff has been incredibly supportive and hardworking and gathering data and information to support the efforts of the Education Committee. One of the items listed as 20A, we want to provide an update on the Education Subcommittee meetings that were held over the summer months through the middle of October. Just to refresh everyone's memory, at the end of the last calendar year, 2016, the Education Committee was charged with gathering data to make sure all of the curriculum and programming for PTs and vocational nurses reflect the scope of practice that would be needed for their good service for the safety of the public in the future. We know what needs to be done to serve the public today. But the mandate to us was to look at the scope beyond that. A licensed individual practices for many years, and things are changing. And thank you. I see one of our NECs to give us at least an update. Please.
We've
Introduce yourself.
Hi, Jessica Gomez, Nursing Education Consultant.
Jessica, can we have you talk into the mic.
I was. Is that better?
Bingo.
Okay. We've completed 2 sessions. Each session was a northern and a southern data gathering session. So we were able to get the consensus from the majority of the state as we could. Our stakeholders that were present were directors, instructors, program owners, administrators of nursing facilities, and public members. And so we were able to reach out to as many people as we could to get this data. The sessions have been completed, and at this time we're going to have the analysis completed to be able to be submitted to the Education Committee for their January meeting. The one thing that came out very clear from this meeting was that the directors really appreciated having these types of meetings and is requesting that the Education Committee continue having these types of open meetings that the directors can voice their opinions in.
If I may have a question.
Please.
Thank you, Education Committee, for setting these up and NECs for staffing these. I think they're also a great idea. My one question would be at the events themselves, was there representatives from psychiatric technician programs as well as VN programs at each session?
Yes, there were.
Want to make sure we don't get lost in this?
No, we made sure that all of our directors from every one of our programs were invited. They were also asked to invite some of their clinical facility sites to join. So we had representatives, and we had some representatives from the mental health areas who was looking for assistance to get more help. So
glad to hear that, and glad to hear the facilities were involved.
Other questions? It is my understanding as soon as that information is available, the Education Committee will be reviewing it and making recommendations that we will bring to the board at its February 2018 meeting. Thank you.
welcome.
We have the next item. We have a proposal for the adoption of fixed passage rates. And this is in response to another committee that asked us to explore and to bring information back to the board and make a recommendation. We were fortunate in the fact that some of the data gathering sessions were still open, and we asked staff to add the question about a fixed pass rate because we wanted to make sure we got some input from all of our stakeholders. And so the last session, both North and South, did include this as a topic. And Jessica has worked very hard to put together a summary to help us with this discussion.
I'm going to let Brian start with this, and then I will take over from him.
Thank you, Brian.
The proposal for the adoption of fixed passage rates, that was an assignment that our executive officer, Ms. Anderson, spearheaded with guidance from the Education Committee. And just give a background of the history. I mean, historically, California's VN pass rate has been historically very low. Among the 50 states, 4 times California ranked 50th out of 50 in 07, 08, 2012, 2016. 3 times California ranked 49th out of 50, 09, 2010, 2015. 2 times California ranked 48th out of 50, 2011, 2014, and 1 time California ranked 47th out of 50 in 2013. So it's an alarming trend. Our current regulations, California Code of Regulations, Title 16, Section 2530, little l and L1, currently allows schools to operate without being placed on provisional approval if their pass rates do not fall below 10% of the statewide average annual pass rate, which equates to the lower 60th percentile. They must maintain this pass rate for 2 years or 8 consecutive quarters, or be subject to being placed on provisional approval. It's important to note that California's VN pass rate hovers around 70%. The 10-year national statewide average pass rate is 84.8%. In terms of our authority, B&P Code Section 2841 and 4501.1 for VNs and PTs specifically mandate the board to protect California consumers by exercising its licensing, regulatory, and disciplinary functions. For the LVNs, California Code of Regulations Title 16, Section 2854 give the board rulemaking authority. For the PTs, CCR Title 16, Section 4504 give the board rulemaking authority. The board passed a motion in May 2014 proposal to amend the specific CCR. However, that proposed regulation package was geared to eliminating the 2-year or 8 consecutive quarter requirements for both licensee categories. With direction from the Education Committee, the board surveyed states with assistance from the National Council of State Boards of Nursing. 33 out of 53 states have responded to the survey. The majority of the states do have a fixed pass rate, with 75% being the lowest. Comparable states, as identified by the Education Committee, are Colorado, Florida, Hawaii, Nevada, New York, Texas, and Washington. They were also included in their responses. With the data gathered, the Education Committee recommends that the board have a minimum fixed pass rate of 75% for VNs and PTs. That takes into account regular as well as irregular programs. The Education Committee also recommends that the board have open discussion in regards to the timeframe of how long the fixed pass rate must be maintained. As is written currently in regulations, it is 2 years or 8 consecutive quarters. The Education Committee's goal is to balance public protection with that of licensee protection. Amending regulations with a proposed minimum 75% fixed pass rate would put California on par with states with the lowest fixed pass rate. By amending regulations, it's two-pronged positive. It allows the board the ability to react more quickly and potentially place a school on provisional approval, creating a closer partnership with one goal: success for the school, and improves the quality of education and instruction and increase student achieving, ultimately aligning with the board's mission of protecting consumers.
And you did report on the VNs, but also this would affect PTs.
Correct. We would request that the board take into consideration a uniform passage rate.
So that we can have discussion, I move that CCR Section 2530 and Section 2585 be amended, and that a pass rate percentage of at least 75% be adopted.
A second.
Yeah, discussion.
Are we ready for discussion?
Oh, there's a motion and a second on the floor that's the only recommendation that you're gonna.
At this time,
At
yes.
this time, that we amend CCR Section 2530 VN and 2585 PT be amended, that a pass rate percentage of at least 75% be adopted. And that was moved by Bernice and second by Samantha. Any board discussion?
I just have a few comments similar to what I've said at board meetings before. We license the largest number of VNs of any state or U.S. territory, and in fact, more than several states and territories combined. We should be a leader in this area. We should be leading the way in quality education and quality candidates for licensure. The problem is that when you have a moving target, underperforming schools just bring down their own standard. The worse they do, the lower the standard gets set, and that's not it's not a proper way to protect consumers. It's not fair to the students or to the public. Also, you had mentioned letting the 8 quarters or 2 years. You brought that up. Are we discussing that now or only this motion?
The motion is about the percentage.
Then I
If
will
this
not.
does not pass, the other would be of no importance.
Carol?
Just want to commend the education committee and all those people that work with them on doing a great job. I know it took a lot of work, but we appreciate your feedback. Thank you.
Any further discussion, Paula?
My question is, and either of you can answer, I want to say thank you so much for providing such thorough report and giving us numbers, and it really helps us understand the problem and why we should make changes. My only question is, what would be the implication for students when the school they're attending and they're about to complete their education goes on probation, or they lose their approval status? Because I've had students that enter medical school and then that happens to them, and then they have to go somewhere else and sometimes start their education all over. What's the implication for those students?
At first, the program would go on to a provisional approval, which would not affect the student being able to complete their program. It would not be until the program had demonstrated that they could not bring up their pass rates that the board would then make the decision to remove the approval of the program. The implications to the students would be that yes, they would probably have to complete their program at another school, and at times they have been allowed schools to teach out. So it would depend on how far through the program the students were.
To piggyback off that, I think that worst case scenario, yes, it would be a burden for some students, but we have a mechanism in place with provisional approval that gives a lot of time for the board to partner with that school to get them into compliance. If a school cannot maintain that compliance or get into compliance, the bigger picture is that there would be very detrimental if those students were continuing their education with that school.
How would we disseminate the information when a school is in probation, or perhaps may lose their status because I'm sure they'll still be accepting students.
Schools have to get permission to start new classes. That's part of the process. Maybe as an NEC, you want to just quickly tell what's available on the website and how we make notification about school status.
On the website, there is an area for all approved schools. If the school is on provisional approval, there is an asterisk by there which gives the time that the school is on provisional, so that the students can make a wise choice on whether or not they want to attend the school that is on provisional or join that, or to look at other schools. Also, pass rates are on the board website, so that students can also look at that.
I'm sorry, just one clarification. Schools must post it at their facility.
school.
Yes.
Post their provisional approval and their pass rates. They must post it at their facility.
Thank you.
The other thing that's important to remember is that programs are placed on provisional approval by the board. That's not done outside of an official board meeting. Once that occurs, as Ms. Gomez has stated, that information is uploaded to the board's website. We also communicate that information to the Bureau for Private Post-Secondary Education. It then becomes the applicant's responsibility in selecting a school to review that data that's listed on the website and choose the school that best meets their needs. Now, and there certainly have been occasions where the board has revoked a program's approval while there are students still there for any number of reasons. At that point, the students who are then enrolled have also a couple of options. First of all, depending on where they are in the process, they may be able to transfer into another approved school, and there is a vehicle in place for that. And if you look at the procedure and regulation for granting credit for prior education and experience, that's how that occurs. It then becomes the accepting school's responsibility to determine where they are where the applicants falls in terms of the amount of knowledge that's consistent with their approved curriculum. If the decision is made to admit the student, then that's how that occurs. If they are close to completion, they may elect to pursue licensure via equivalent education and experience. So that's the other option that is available to them.
Samantha?
I would also just mention that there's also a danger in allowing students to continue in a school that we're going to revoke the approval of because the education they're receiving is substandard at that point, and they have not a very good likelihood of passing the board exam, and also being a well-qualified and safe practitioner if they do graduate from that program. So many times we've had students transfer, not start at the beginning again, but transfer to other schools where they would actually receive a better quality of education, have a better chance of passing their board, and be a more competent and safe practitioner when they do graduate. So there is some danger to the student of staying in a bad school too.
Any other discussion by the board?
Just a comment, and thank you to my colleague for mentioning the purpose of the Education Committee overall is to ensure that programming meets the standard set, and it particularly keeping in mind protection of the public.
Since there's a motion on the floor, board discussion, is there any public comment? If we could have you speak into the mic and...
Yes, good morning. My name is Mary McHugh, and although I'm a director of a school, I'm here right now as the new president of the Southern California Directors of Vocational Nursing Programs. And our organization does agree with this particular motion. We would ask, however, that the board give consideration to putting us on the same footing, in other words, equality, with the other states. We are a state that allows graduates to test indefinitely. We've had schools that say they've had graduates who had pursued another career, been laid off, 15 years later, no nursing contact, come back and test, and of course fail. But there are some reviews that they, without any clinical contact, that they could have taken, they probably would have passed. For example, I've taken graduates who'd been out 5-6 years with no nursing content, put them through an ATI review, and they passed immediately. So we ask the board to consider the possibility of, for example, Texas limits the amount of time they can take the test to 2 years before they have to come back to the school. And we would ask the board consider strongly putting us on the same footing with those other states that in fact do restrict the amount of time. And we ask that as a measure for public safety, so that when a person passes what is strictly a written test, they are still safe clinically. Thank you very much.
Before you leave, does your organization have a recommendation in terms of specific time frame?
We had put forth a proposal that after 6 months they come back to the school. That would be shorter. Most states that I'm aware of, because we did do a survey of several states, require they come back for remediation and retesting of clinical skills, which we all have skills labs to do, if they don't test within the first year. And I think the board would be best suited to make judgments on the length of time. But I think the other states can boast of higher pass rates because they restrict the amount of time a person has to take the test when they're still probably safe to practice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Seeing none, is there any further board discussion?
Yeah, what would be a state to look at, and this is for, that we should look at what their,
We did a survey through NCSBN, which contacted every one of the boards. And in looking at this, we had the specific states that we had been requested to look at, Texas being one of them. And the information that we got back from Texas is that they do allow them to take them for 4 years, not 2 years. Additionally, the majority of the states, out of the 33 states that we got back in the survey, there were only 3 that stated that they did not take first-time testers throughout the whole time.
I think that would probably be better suited for the education committee to review before we discuss that further, because that's not particularly on the agenda
Okay, I'm
at
sorry.
this time.
Madam President, that is not part of this amendment, of this motion, but it is a point that we will be bringing up once there's a decision about this motion.
I would agree. And the other reason that I believe we should halt this part of the discussion and bring it back at the February meeting is that there are a number of variables that result in the variation in pass rates. A number of them. One of which is the frequency of testing.
That's correct.
But that's only one. There are many things that are going on. So for you to have a thorough understanding of the situation that we have identified, we would request that you allow us to bring some of that data back to you. If you also would look at the Education Division reports for the past few years, they have, if you look at the data, you'll see information in terms of the pass rates for approved programs, the pass rates for provisionally approved programs, the pass rates for those who are not on provisional, for VN and PT, and then you'll also see a comparison of the national. And that was added to ensure that the board was aware of the problem. It also has allowed us to gather statistical data to show you what exactly the problems are. That will be coming back to you in February.
Thank you.
So is there any further discussion on the motion on the floor? Seeing none?
Is this the set pass rate motion?
This is the motion to set the pass rate.
It's been a while, I'd forgotten.
Madam President, do you mind restating it so everyone? Thank you. My apologies.
So the motion on the floor that was made by Bernice is to amend CCR section 2530 VN and 2585 PT be amended, and that a pass rate percentage of at least 75% be adopted. And Samantha seconded, and there was discussion and public comment. Seeing no further discussion, we'll do a roll call vote. Alita?
Aye.
Paul?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Paula?
yes.
Bernice?
Yes.
Myself is yes. Samantha?
Yes.
And Cheryl?
Yes.
So the motion carries. It was unanimous. So I will turn it back over to Miss Bernice.
Thank you. Now that we have adopted this motion, we would like to get some feedback from the board and any public comment about how to define the criteria around schools as they move to this new goal. In other words, what would you consider to be a reasonable amount of time before this is enacted? Do you believe it should be grandfathered? Should there be any stipulation, and it was mentioned a little earlier, about how many times a person can test, or the time from program completion until testing? We very much, as an education committee, would like to get some feedback, some information, and we will go back as committee and bring back definite recommendations for action at the February meeting.
Dr.
Wanted to be very careful with this. We recognize it is a major change for the state of California. And we want to make sure everyone has enough information, that our stakeholders have had an opportunity to give us feedback and comment. Because we want to ensure that what we do will have a direct effect on upholding and protecting the safety of the public of California.
Samantha?
Thank you, Dr. Baste Martinez. I would have a comment about that. We've heard repeatedly from schools in the past, I've heard in the past 3 years, that students go several years without taking the exam and then go back and take it. This is a problem in a couple ways. One way is we've heard that these outliers skew the pass rate data. I've looked at the statistics, and I agree with that, that these outliers are coming back and maybe having a negative effect on pass rates. But the more important problem is that our test is a written test. Our test is written only. And that doesn't demonstrate, we don't have a practicum, we don't have a practical component. And the clinical skills, if not practiced recently or kept or repeatedly practiced, can be lost. And that directly affects consumer protection and safety when these nurses and psych techs are now out there practicing. So I would be very much in favor of setting a limit on the time you can take the exam before you must have a refresher of clinical. It directly impacts public safety. And if I'm putting something out there, I might put out there for a suggestion 2 years. Carol?
I have an issue with the time frame for looking at the percentage of pass rates. Currently, our regulation sets forth a time period which it looks like can be sort of be manipulated. In other words, the schools can operate for so long, and then they can stop, and then they can start up again. And so, but I'm going to let Ms. Anderson explain that in more detail. Do you know what I'm referring to? Okay, so judging the pass rate, I believe right now it's over a 24 month period. Yes, thank you. For that.
There are two things, and it's a part of it it has to do with the language of the regulations. At one point, and what it does is it addresses two different issues. The first says that programs must maintain an average annual pass rate that is no less than 10 percentage points below the state average. Is that the one you're talking about? Okay. The other talks about you must you must be compliant for 8 consecutive quarters.
That's it.
Those are the two, that's the area that she's referring to. And the 8 consecutive quarters, when that language was adopted, first of all, and let's back up, when the language for provisional approval was developed by the board and pursued, if you recall, initially we were looking at 75%. This is back in 2000. We conducted sessions across the state, answering information, gathering data to see what we could do. At that point, boards did not have a standard or a requirement in terms of maintaining a pass rate. The 70% was a compromise to get something in the regulation. So it's now time to go beyond that. And the fixed rate of 75% is exactly what the data says we should be doing. The reason the 8 quarters are there is that some programs, as was reported, they are 8 quarters in length or a 2-year program. And that's why that was there. That help you?
So we need to make an adjustment.
That's correct. It will be, but ideally what we could do, if we're going to revise that reg, the original intent when we have been discussing this the past few months or few years is to correct it all at one time, so that it's a flat 75%.
So are you saying now that it's flat 75, we don't need to worry about looking at whether it's a
In terms of the regs,
24-month?
no. In terms of, I'm not sure. I don't necessarily believe the length of the program should be a part of that.
Okay.
So that with the language that would be proposed, we would clean up that disparity between the languages.
I'm sorry, what is it that's controversial about the 24-month period?
Not it's controversial. One part contradicts the other. That's what she's talking about. Are you familiar with the reg?
No, not right.
Really have to look at the regulation to see it. Okay, since we're talking about psych tech, let's go to the psych tech reg. I get my glasses off.
Well, and one part of it also is 2 years 8 quarters is a long time for a school to be underperforming before taking any action. I mean, that's a lot of students that go through. And if someone has a pass rate of 30%, say, just something I thought of, that's if we don't do something about that, we let that go on for 8 quarters, we're not doing our duty to protect the consumers.
In addition, there's money involved. There's money involved for the students.
I thought I heard Ms. Turner say something to the effect that there was a way of shutting down the school and skewing the data. I didn't understand that.
No, the actual reg in terms of psych tech and the language would be equivalent for VN. For VN, it would be section 2530L. For psychiatric technicians is 2585L, and it reads, for psychiatric technician or VN, the program shall maintain a yearly average minimum pass rate on the licensure examination that does not fall below 10 percentage points of the state average annual pass rate for first-time candidates of approved psychiatric technician, obviously RVN schools, for the same period. And then number 1 under that reads, failure to maintain the required yearly average minimum pass rate for 2 years or 8 consecutive quarters may be cause to place a program on provisional approval. So therein is the discrepancy. Now, we have received clarification from legal previously that says, because it says the language reads the program shall maintain a yearly average minimum pass rate, that the board is clear to place programs on provisional approval if there are 4 consecutive quarters, not 8.
I got you.
So that then is the
Thank
discrepancy.
you.
That makes sense.
Yes, that helps.
And just to add an academic piece, not necessarily would 4 quarters be a calendar year. Just the operative is consecutive.
Any further discussion?
I would just like to add that the motion contemplates an amendment to the regulations, and that would require a process going forward.
Oh, true.
During which the specifics could be evaluated, and there's a process for proposing and adopting the regulations and having that reviewed that would have.
Yeah, no, it's my understanding we're not making amendments to the motion right now. We're just making suggestions as to some going forward.
Correct.
Yeah, additional criteria that we could investigate.
Again, well, I think I've heard 2 things, but the Education Committee wants feedback from the board and public comment about the implementation of a 75% pass rate. And we will go back into committee. We'll be gathering some data with the assistance of staff because we will return to the February meeting with more detail and a specific recommendation about enactment. And again, we're doing this because part of the charge from another committee, legislative committee, because they believe there might be need for them to do the work to take action to change a statute.
Actually, that would not be a statutory change, it's a regulation.
Thank you. I stand corrected, and I appreciate that.
Any further discussion?
Yeah, I would like to know if we're considering, or the suggestions that we're providing. When one of the suggestions brought up by Bernice was the a school being grandfathered in. Like, what would be? Yeah, that was just something you brought up. Talk about that because there needs to be limitations on how your grandfather in for how long, and maybe let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you would like the committee to gather some data about that.
Yes.
And we will bring back we will have a recommended motion, and we will explain how we arrived at that. We will look at limitations based on your recommendation. Thank you.
I'm so appreciative of you clarifying. Thank you.
Are there other comments or recommendations? We want to make sure we look at and explore this completely and fully, because we will be returning with another detailed report like what you saw in terms of pass rates.
Require a motion for us to send the Education Committee back to the committee. Okay. Okay. Can I ask for public comment on that, or public ideas, or should they? Okay. Okay. So, with that being said,
You have to tell them though.
the Education Committee is requesting comments from the stakeholders in regards to the discussions on
On
criteria.
we're asking about any input that the general public might have regarding the implementation of a 75% pass rate. And examples would be how long, whether it be 2 year limitation, etc. And as I understand, since we do not have a motion on the floor, we will have to determine a vehicle by which to gather the data.
So that needs to be submitted to the committee prior to the next board meeting.
And
Or next
by the
committee
way,
meeting, excuse me.
the education committee meetings tend to be open. We have the public with us all of the time. So the next posted education committee, we would invite your comment, either sending through the staff or your presence. And I'm sorry, we cannot, unless there's a motion on the floor, if I'm understanding correctly, public comment cannot be taken at this moment.
But thank you.
Nope.
Okay.
This concludes our discussion around a recommendation. Well, at this time, it concludes our discussion around setting a fixed pass rate. We have, as a committee, reviewed one of our programs, and it is the committee's recommendation to the board that this program be placed on provisional approval. And we have our representative staff person, and then we will ask to hear from the program.
This item comes on after having been formally approved for recommendation at the
Education
meeting,
committee.
so therefore no motion or second is required. It is now a pending motion before this body.
Thank you.
Gavilan College is brought to you for consideration of being placed on provisional approval. The program submitted their program record survey to the board in June of 2017. There were numerous questions that were inconsistent in the information that was received, and the board was not getting information back from the college of the information that we needed. Additionally, there was another report that was submitted, which is the annual report, which brought forward some real concerns as of the number of hours the pharmacology course was being held. We have a requirement that that's the one course that the program has in the curriculum that has the number of hours that is required for a course, which is 54. And from the information that was supplied in the annual report, the program was providing the pharmacology course for a total of 21 hours. So because of the inconsistencies and information, on October 4th and 5th, an announced visit was made to the program. On Friday before the visit, the director was called and notified of the information that was needed to be evaluated at the time of the visit. At the time that board staff arrived at the school, none of the information was arranged for access at that time. During the site visit, there was information that was requested, which is looking at the students, most recent graduate students' files, was never provided to the board. In looking at the information that had been supplied to us, it was identified that one of their facilities that they were doing clinicals at had never been approved. And so they were at an unapproved clinical site. And so this was one of the other reasons that the site visit was done. In talking with the director, it was very concerning because every question that was asked to the director, she did not know the answers to the questions. I asked the director, how many students does she have? She could not answer. When I asked her about attendance policy, she says, well, you'll have to get that from the instructors. I don't know. When I asked her about remediation of students, she did not know how that was done or how it was handled. There was not a policy. And she said I would need to refer that to the instructors. When I asked about the instructional plan, there was no instructional plan at the program. The program was no longer following the board approved curriculum that had been submitted to the board and approved in 2005. In discussing with the instructors and with the administration, it was identified that there had in the past been an issue where they were trying very hard to align the LVN program with the RN program. And so it would be just move through from the admission, then they would be able to take the licensure and then take the RN. So they were looking more at the RN requirements than at the curriculum that had been approved by the board. Additionally, at one point, the IV IV insertion and blood withdrawal, which is a post-licensure certification, had been put into their fundamentals, and it has been removed. But it was as in the meeting minutes of the October 2016 meeting minutes from the school that they were contemplating putting it back in and discussion around that. And so there's real issues about the curriculum and it's not being followed. And so of the 6 violations that were identified, one has been corrected at this time, and that is they do now have approval for the clinical site that they were going to. It is important to note that this school, while it has violations and while there is issues, they do have a 100% pass rate of their licensure examinations. But part of this is that they're not following their curriculum, and this is one of the biggest issues that we could find.
And thank you very much. And it through further questioning, it was our understanding as an education committee that the program that was in use at the time, because it followed a different set of criteria for a different license, while students had information theoretically to pass and score highly on the exam, they did not have or were not exposed to what is part of the clinical practice for LVNs. So one of the challenges, again, because we as a committee are responsible for protecting the safety of California, the potential of a licensed person from that particular program working in an LVN setting possibly would not be able to demonstrate or to, in their workplace, handle expectations of an LVN.
Any comment from the board?
And I believe we do have a representative from the school. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for sending Jessica to us. We were really glad that she made the visit. And my name is Susan Turner, and I'm the interim director for the program. So I've been at Gavilan College for many years, 85 through 1991 and 2004 till now. And we really welcomed her visit. She's helped us get administrative support to know to make everything, the infrastructure right, because we've done a really good job training the students, but the infrastructure that supports what we were doing has really been very problematic for a long time. And I think her coming, she recognized over the phone and reports that she was receiving, they didn't really add up correctly. And she validated what faculty had brought forth to administration, and nothing happened. Things are happening now. And we're very grateful for the visit.
And if I can ask, are you in agreement with the recommendations from the Education
Absolutely.
Committee? Okay.
Sorry to say, but yes.
Okay.
And want to make sure everyone has reviewed those recommendations, because there's some time frames there, and that affects how this program's faculty as well as director will be able to do their work. One of our observations as an education committee, this is at a community college, and there's also contractual union there. And because some of the deadline dates are set and were agreed upon, but they're not during the time frame when faculty work. We want to make sure that the program, its staff, its faculty, and the director get the due process and the time, which means that's over and above what is a faculty contract. However, that college wishes to work on that, but not to say they cannot do the work because they're out of contract, because the dates have been agreed upon.
That was going to be one thing that I mentioned. I see that you have a curriculum revision due December 31st, 2017. And I know that community college will not be in session during that time. Do you have a plan to meet that deadline? Can you meet that deadline?
We are going to give it our very best effort. We're working now, and I've spoken to the president and vice president. They're totally in support of this. And after the last meeting here, when the discussion came up about an academic calendar and our negotiated contract, I did let them know that you discussed documentation that they would support working outside of the contract. And they are expecting, I don't know if you put it in writing that you expect the documentation, that would be great. But my expectation is for faculty to keep track of their hours and to submit a timesheet and be paid for the work done outside of the contract. And I do believe I have been released from my teaching time, but there's also day-to-day things that are happening that have to be taken care of. It's not like I can devote every hour on the curriculum, but I have been released 100% from teaching and have secured a replacement for my role.
And you have staff that are full-time tenured, or you work with a
We
lot of
have
adjunct?
one other full-time faculty who is tenured and one new faculty who is a graduate of our program, and she's on the tenure track.
So you work out those limits and overload and all that. Thank you for being here. It would be remiss for me not to point out that your school does have some things going for it. You have a 100% pass rate for the past 6 quarters.
Actually, it's pretty much like that down back to 1986 when I started there.
I mean, it's quite impressive to read. 100% all the way back. For
But
as
we
long
require a CNA to enter our program, and we do our program in 4 semesters, so the students get lots of time over and over taking care of patients.
I also see the pictures of your facility. It seems that you're well equipped. Your classroom, your skills lab, it all looks good. So I'm wondering what happened with your maternity placement. How did that fall through the cracks that was not an approved placement?
With our what placement?
Your San Jose maternity nursing?
Well, Kaiser, that hospital at one time was a private hospital. It was called Santa Teresa Hospital, and there was a contract. And when it changed to Kaiser, there was never a new contract written. So I think the contract that Jessica saw was for Santa Teresa Hospital, and I believe it was like 1991. And it's been a Kaiser hospital probably more like 1998 to 2000, in that range.
And it's been corrected, Ms. Gomez? Okay, so that has been corrected.
Yes, it was corrected, but we had to do some hustle to get it done.
Thank you.
And if I may, as an academic who works at a public institution, who understands also what happens administratively when we ask faculty to carry out certain tasks. The challenge, as the education committee viewed it, was you were not, as a program, getting the full support necessary to ensure the functioning and running of the program according to the criteria. Great faculty, committed faculty, working very hard. But in order to have a high quality program, or a program that meets the requirements established by this board, you have to have other kinds of support. It specifies there must be a director. And when the program director doesn't know the number of students in the program, that's a problem. Because if you ask for another class, how can we figure out if it's reasonable to give you a certain number of students? That is not necessarily a faculty role. It can be a faculty on special assignment, but unless that is set forth by that institution, and it is my understanding that we are helping by pointing out the challenges, helping you at your institution ask for and get what you need.
That is correct.
Okay.
Carol?
A couple of questions. First of all, it appears, and I just need you to, and first of all, thank you for coming and being so forthcoming. And I do remember you from '85 because you've been here around about the same time I have.
I've been around here for a
You
long
have.
time.
And I do recognize that the prior director who was there that time has retired. Is the issue that you now have instructors who are not following the approved curriculum? That's kind of what it sounds like. Now, the other piece of that is that then who's leading the program? Because it almost appears that no one is.
We had the same director, which I know you knew.
Yes.
For 30 years.
Right.
And she led the program, and it was faculty didn't participate very much in any of the administration, budget, I actually wrote a lot of the curriculum documents in the 80s and 90s because I'm a good document writer. And towards the end of her career, a lot of things just kind of fell by the wayside and didn't get updated. And then we had a director put in place that had a difficulty following, tracking. It just really wasn't probably the best choice for the program. And despite faculty's concerns and voicing those concerns, nothing seemed to happen for over and over and over. And Jessica's arrival gave validity to things we had been verbalizing quite a bit for quite a long time. And so it's unfortunate that the administration that we reported to didn't supervise better and act on and investigate many concerns, but that is what happened. And Jessica, her list was the same kinds of things we had given hundreds of complaints about.
Okay.
And we have a new president who had concerns but kept getting outvoted on things. She's now our president, and I really feel has understood, but was not in a position where she was effectively able to do much. And her coming in and the things that she found were no surprise to any of us. We've known that the curriculum things, when Kay Bedell was our previous director, she wanted to move us to a 3-year RN program, that because it kept our clinical sites. We had our Kaiser site had announced that they were no longer going to take LVN students. And so the change in moving towards a 3-year RN program was so that we would be able to keep our Kaiser site, which offered med-surg, OB, and peds. And course numbers were changed. They evidently did not come to the boards. The intent was to continue to teach the entire LVN program, but that it would be, you could stop after 2 years with your LVN, or you could continue and do your 3rd year, but they would be considered LVN/RN students during that time, which would keep that clinical site. Unbeknownst to the faculty, we thought we had changed, and because we were not ever part of the board approval process, and when I was doing accreditation documents, I think maybe 2008, 2009, I needed to put in there when we changed to a 3-year RN program, and when I asked her, she said it never changed. And that was a surprise to faculty.
That beyond the scope of what's written in the report before us?
Actually, it's not. It is not.
So
it's not because my question had to do with who's directing the program, and that's what she was responding to. But then I have another follow-up question because, and it has to do with the deadline set in recommendation number 5, December 31st.
Mm-hmm.
And what that says is the program is to evaluate the curriculum and submit a curriculum revision that meets board requirements no later than December 31st. We've got 2 holidays in the middle of there. We're talking about roughly 6 weeks.
Right.
Will that give you, as the director, sufficient time to complete the thorough analysis? That also means meeting with your faculty, identifying whatever changes need to be made, and submitting a revised proposal by December in 6 weeks, because that seems pretty short.
It is short. It is short. And we have been meeting. We've been looking at textbooks in order to create this whole framework. That is that is our plan to meet the December 31st deadline. We have spoken that if it ends up being impossible, that we would submit what we have to show good faith effort, and that we would then ask for an extension. The hope was to have that framework completed so that in February we could still apply to take a class for next fall.
And if I may interject, one of the things about this particular kind of environment, a community college environment, there is also a pathway for course change inside the institution
Absolutely.
itself.
And it isn't
And it
short.
requires faculty input because faculty, by contract, command and control the curriculum. And so the other piece about that, if not approved by, and when you ask for February, they really wouldn't start until the next academic
Correct.
year. And so if it's delayed afterwards, you're talking about, because of the internal process, the next academic year.
So it would be for fall 2018.
And so that said, one of the challenges about how we budget in public institutions, in order to keep your faculty there, they have to have a full teaching load. And if there are not students in the class because we have not approved you to continue to do what you do, then it also has effect and impact on what they'll be able to report. It's complicated.
Okay, but that leads me to my next question. The first thing was, when do you as the school make a decision in terms of the students that you are going to admit to your next class?
We only admit in the fall.
Right.
And we make our decision and usually mail our results July 1. So right now, students are applying.
So that if your curriculum, and I still think December is a little early, but the other piece of that is, when do you have to have your curriculum presented to your school's curriculum committee? Or do you have one?
Beginning of February.
Beginning of February.
And the Vice President of Academic Affairs has already notified the curriculum committee that we will be going to the top of the list. So that curriculum would be approved for by the end of this academic year, so that it would be in place for fall 2018.
And there are issues that it has to be openly published so that students know what's on the schedule when they set up, even though you might enroll them in your unit.
Could you repeat what you just said?
One of the pieces about publics, if you have courses you're offering, they do have to go on the schedule of courses. So the correct numbers need to be there. So when students build their schedules,
Right.
they are enrolled in the appropriate classes, because that is how it's determined whether a faculty member has a full load or not, or has the appropriate number of teaching courses and students within a course. Or else they get canceled. That's just the reality.
Right.
Would it help, because I hear you that you may or may not be able to get that process completed then. Perhaps it would help if we had a follow-up report at the February 18 board meeting, because if you are going to need an extension, the board is the one that would have to grant that. It would not be the consultant. So that may be another option. What do you think?
I have a question about that. I get it. I work at a community college. I get it. What it seems like is your best bet would be to do everything possible to get that report in December 31st, because I'm wondering, and Cheryl, Bernice, if you don't get your report into February, staff need the time to look at the report before they can recommend if you take a class or not. So that might be a little too late.
Oh,
Am I
no,
missing
oh, no,
something?
I didn't mean they submit the report in February. I mean, put them on the February agenda so that the board would have an idea as to whether or not the
Oh.
curriculum had been completed or not.
Absolutely, I agree
And
with
then if
that.
you need to extend it, then the board extends it.
I
But the
got you.
consultant cannot extend it.
I got you. Yeah.
That's great. And if
So,
we have it done, perhaps you could then give us approval to move forward and be able to admit a class.
So would that amend their recommendation to place them on the agenda, February agenda? So February plus the November.
So I would move to
this is November.
No, 2019.
Oh, 2019, sorry.
Should I make a motion?
What we would be actually amending, because the education committee is by recommendation, we had to have a motion to make that recommendation. So you're amending.
I would move to amend the recommendation in the only way as to add a section stating place the program on the February 2018 board agenda.
Yeah.
Or
Buffalo
February
News.
2018. And keep number 2 November 19.
Second.
Okay, so there is a motion that was recommended by the Education Committee to accept the recommendations. And then it was amended by Samantha to add another recommendation to place the school on the February 2018 board agenda and continue to keep them on the November 2019 agenda also. Is there any further discussion by board members? Seeing none, is there any public comment? Seeing none, we'll do a roll call vote on the motion from the Education Committee and then amended by Samantha and John. Cheryl?
I abstain.
Okay, Samantha?
Yes.
Myself is yes, Bernice?
Yes.
Paula?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Alita?
Aye.
So motion carries with one abstention.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that ends our Education Committee report.
And I believe lunch is here. So we will go on lunch until 1:30. So we're going to currently go on break till 1:30. We'll commence at 1:30. Thank you.